Your electorate includes a number of these towers that are in lockdown. What are your concerns?
Hi, good morning, Annalise. Look, I'm concerned about the fact that the people in housing commission towers are often the most disadvantaged, and often all levels of government see them as an afterthought, which is something that is an ongoing thing for decades. I grew up in a housing commission. I can understand the frustration and anger of the people that live in those housing estates. And while I support the Victorian government's strong health response to ring-fence the virus and keep it under control, there's some questions that have got to be asked about how the local and state governments and federal governments deal with people in those towers. These people have new and emerging migrant groups. They've got language barriers. They've got issues with health. They've got socioeconomic disadvantage. What were the proactive policies taken to actually address some of their issues around communications on basic health information in the lead up? And certainly, what about the other 40 towers in Victoria? What's been done to mitigate these types of extreme measures?
Because that is the question. If some of these towers don't actually have any cases of coronavirus, is it reasonable to be locking them down at that stage, assuming that they are going to be like cruise ships and eventually get it? Or should there be proactive measures to be perhaps moving people out of these towers before the outbreak begins?
Well, they're valid questions. And, I would also ask the question, will private residences or private tower blocks in South Yarra or Toorak have the same treatment as a housing commission? I mean, my concern is around the fact that often the people in housing commissions, the residents there, have this extra layer of disadvantage because of their high-density housing. And, what are the options that have been looked at with respect to other towers and other housing commission estates across the state? Is there a possibility of moving people out, maybe for any potential further outbreaks in other towers? These are things I think the state government is probably looking very closely at right now.
What did you make of Pauline Hansen's comments where she said a number of the residents in those towers would be drug addicts and alcoholics when referring to the vulnerability that many of them face?
Oh, well, Channel 9 kind of responded to that, didn't they, by cancelling her from appearing again because they had disgraceful comments. First of all, just on the refusal of taking tests, there's no particular ethnic demographic that refuses to take tests. In fact, there's a lot of people, the reporting is that people are not taking tests because they, have bought into some of these conspiracy theories on the internet about the coronavirus, and that doesn't, it's not a particular ethnicity or not. The really disturbing thing about her comments is this same kind of inherent bias and prejudice towards people in housing commissions, mainly people who are of migrant background, but not exclusively. We have a lot of people with socioeconomic disadvantage. These are the most invisible people in our society. Now, this case now, what we're seeing happening with this hard lockdown, has shone a light on this disadvantage. This is a moment that I'm hoping we can talk about how we increase funding for public housing and resources for people in public housing. The equality of opportunity that in this country, real equality of opportunity, which gave me a chance to succeed in this country, was based on access to education, access to healthcare, access to housing. I grew up in a public housing estate. And when I was growing up 40 years ago, there was 6% of all total housing stock was public housing. That's now dropped down to 2%. So those opportunities are not being given to new Australians to actually work hard and succeed based on their merit.
You just mentioned that you've read reports that people aren't taking the tests because they're buying into conspiracy theories that the coronavirus isn't real. You're the local member. Have you sought any kind of clarification from authorities about why people aren't taking the tests?
Yeah, look, what I've been told and what I understand it is a lot of people, well, there's different categories of people. Some people are afraid when someone comes and knocks at your door and they might not speak English as the first language. They might be afraid of authority. They may come from countries, for example, where they were oppressed or repressed and so on. And then there's a lot of people also who are buying into some of these conspiracy theories that are flying around about the coronavirus and refuse to get tested on that basis. What I've tried to do in my local community, I've got 5 suburbs, Annalise, in my electorate that are under local lockdown. A couple of months ago, back in April, I sent out letters in multiple languages other than English with basic information and numbers that they could call. I had people speak language in my office that could answer those calls to help serve those communities. And I also put ads up on SBS radio because it was important to have a communication channel which was verbal as well. And I've tried to actually go and reach out to people in my community in English as well with letters and information. So it's about informing people and reassuring them about the need for testing and how it's important for their health and their family's health and the broader community.
So you've rightly acknowledged that Victoria is a very multicultural community. A lot of these people wouldn't speak English as the first language. Why have you been responsive enough to talk to the people in their own language, but we haven't seen the Victorian government do the same? Is that a failure of the Andrews government?
Well, I don't think that's fair, Annalise. The Victorian government has sent out communications in multiple languages. They have reached out to those communities. I guess what I'm raising, particularly in the context about the housing commission, the lockdown, the hard lockdown of those estates, is now the invisible are becoming visible. You know, most people don't really think about people in housing commissions or houses. They're unseen in many respects. You know, in a housing estate in my electorate a couple of years ago, I had to drag the police and the DHS authorities, the bureaucrats, to come to a meeting to hear out concerns from residents. Do you reckon if a federal MP didn't push for that, it would have happened? You know, so these are some of the most vulnerable and most disadvantaged people in our community. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a voice. It doesn't mean they don't have the opportunity and their own agency as individuals and as part of their community. You know, they get access to education. They work. They try and do the best for their children and have a better life in this country, like my parents did. State governments, local governments, federal governments, we all have to do better. Not just in funding more public housing and social housing, but in engaging with those communities to give them the opportunity. There are so many people that could be successful from those communities if they're given the opportunity, if they're given that level playing field. And to me, that's the most important thing. This is not a Labor or Liberal thing. It's not a federal or state thing. I want us to all do better and take this moment to actually engage with those communities because there's such great potential there for people to achieve.